Hello, everybody, and welcome to R2v3 Read Along with GlenView Group. We are so excited that you are joining us, and we're excited to bring you this information. It's very exciting. New R2v3 was published on July 1st. Today we are going through core requirement number 7, data security. It took us a while to figure out core requirement, process requirement, R2 processing requirements. Wait, no, I still don't get that one. Rec. R2 equipment categorization. So anyways, we're going to follow the same structure that we did before. Asal is going to read the standard section by section, and then Mike and I will dissect it. So let's get started. Asal?
Hi, everybody. So we're just going to jump in here to core requirement number 7, which is the data security requirement. The general principle is to provide for the security and sanitization of all data storage devices as appropriate to the type of device and level of sensitivity of the data.
So this one is a little bit more specific than the data destruction provision 8 of R2 2013, because here is saying security, sanitization of all data storage devices and the type of device and level of the sensitivity of the data. So the general principle is a little bit more specific than it was under provision 8.
Okay. And I'm going to get into the documentation requirements now of 7A. 7A1, an R2 facility shall document and maintain a data sanitization plan and procedures, including defining the following. A, security controls to protect data in the R2 facility's control, including declarations of secured areas dedicated to data sanitization with access limited to authorized individuals.
So under the previous standard, you were required to have a documented information in regards to your data destruction procedure, but you weren't required specifically in that plan to document what security controls you have in place. That was a separate subsection under provision 8. So now here it's specifically calling out that the data security controls have to be a part of the documentation in the data sanitization plan and declarations of secured areas dedicated to data sanitization with access limited to authorized individuals. So that's something that is new. It's something that is an easy fix or an easy transition in documentation. It's just defining that. Most places that are doing, some type of data sanitization already have these dedicated areas and as well as access. So it's just a matter of documenting it if you don't have it documented already.
Good. And 1B, we have to define the types of data storage devices accepted that may contain data.
So that all depends upon the operation or what they're doing at the facility and, the knowledge of what type of device is coming in. And then that also goes to the rec. You have to know what type of data containing devices are coming in. Do they contain data, or is it already been sanitized?
And probably also in your sorting process to be able to train people to identify data containing devices, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they have to know which ones need to be marked according to the rec.
Mm-hmm. 1C, the types of data to be sanitized.
So this is all just different types of various data that could be on devices. It could be from a hard drive to a SD card or, various other media.
But the difference is now that we have to document it now, right? Like as opposed to before.
Yes. specifically, all of this is calling for the documentation to say what type of data is going to be sanitized. So the other one was data storage devices, and then this one is the types of data to be sanitized.
Right. 1D, we have to have a declaration of general information that does not need to be sanitized. What's an example of this type of information?
Declaration of general information that does not need to be sanitized. So that would be something that probably has no personal identifiable information or personal health information or anything that contains something that's personal. It's just general information. So a cable box comes with a hard drive in it. And what you're going to find on that hard drive is show recordings, but it doesn't have like the username or account and stuff like that. As far as I know, it's just basic, very general information in regards to, you know, what somebody is recording with whatever, you know, cable company they have.
Unless that's personal data somehow, right?
Yeah.
Another thing that I would say that organizations can declare they're not going to touch is something, or like if their customer says that they don't need to do a data eradication in certain things. So for example, an R2 client today, even today with current R2 standard, R2 version 2013, if your contract with the client says that you don't need to do data eradication because they've done it or whatever, then you technically don't have to do that because they're declaring that that sanitization has already been done.
1E, potential associations to network services that could automatically repopulate data on the device. So this would be like a cloud server where I can,
or on a cell phone, various links to somebody's iCloud account, or on like a Android phone to their Google account or something like that. Stuff that could repopulate with data if it's not properly sanitized.
So this is why, for example, those kinds of devices are usually reset, right? You reset it to the factory settings, or just do a full shred when that's concerned.
And 1F, and I think this goes back to what Maya was saying, written contractual requirements not to sanitize data on users' data storage devices when requested. So this could be your upstream recycler sending you data with, for example, a declaration that the data has been wiped previous to.
Yeah, and I think I would want to point out, or if me as a consultant or auditor, I would go to organizations' general terms and conditions. So one of the things you guys know that we've been working with our clients is when it comes to anything that they recycle, anything they process, including data, not including the data, even clients who are not R2 recyclers, but even if they're manufacturers and providing services, we're asking them to sit down and really think about what are their general terms and conditions related to all of the possible services that they are offering, and if they have warranties and so on and so forth. But to make it short and make it specific to this is why, for example, if you are an R2 recycler, we would probably want to see something to the effect like, we will do data sanitization and or data destruction unless you customer let us know otherwise, right? This is why it's important for recyclers to really sit down with their clients and write out that scope of work, write out that master service agreement, just so that everybody knows what are the boundaries of the services provided.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add to that, Mike?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. So 1G, applicable legal, supplier, and other requirements for data sanitization, including applicable data breach and privacy regulations.
So a lot of times people have this in like their compliance plan. It's part of Core Requirement 4 now. So I think that's still applicable and should be there so that it can be audited under the compliance evaluation that's done, not a part of the R2 standard, but as a part of the other standards to which the R2 facility is certified to. So yeah, you have to look at what are all the legal, supplier, and other requirements that are applicable to your operation depending on what you're doing, which state you operate in, and the kind of data that you're managing. All of that stuff has certain regulatory implications, and yeah, depending on your supplier, they might have some enhanced requirements for you as well.
Right. So the thing that comes into mind here is like if you are recycling medical supplies, HIPAA regulations would be applicable to you with regards to patient data.
Yes. Or it's applicable to the upstream vendor, and that they have to ensure that you're managing it properly and doing what needs to be done to eradicate the data on those devices that has personal health information.
Mm-hmm. And 1H, where legal, supplier, and other requirements are addressed in written policies and procedures to ensure conformance.
So I think this is just saying that, you know, identifying what the legal requirements are and where they're addressed in written policies and procedures. So if you have it in your compliance plan, then you should reference that in your data sanitization plan. So legal, supplier, and other regulations are all identified. Here's the list of them, and for reference, they're also identified in our compliance plan, which is audited, annually through the evaluation of compliance audit, and these things are evaluated. So yeah, this is definitely more detail than previously required under documentation, and it's but it's specifically calling out that you not only need to list that stuff, but you need to mention where those are addressed in the policies and procedures of your management system.
And I think here, for example, if you have a compliance listing, you would say, so my customer requires me to do A, B, and C, and then you would have a column for reference documentation or reference website, and you would write out what is the website and or what is the procedure or process or MSA, the client's master service agreement or scope of work, where this requirement is defined. So you are linking all of this together so that when you're doing your compliance review, you know exactly what you need to review and what is the objective evidence that you need or proof that you need to show that you're meeting this legal requirement.
Mm-hmm. And 1I is methods for data sanitization for each type of data storage device.
So depending on what type of materials your facility receives, then you're going to have a defined list of some of those things. So the way of managing a hard drive disk compared to a solid state disk, whether you're doing physical destruction or degaussing, you need to define how that's done specifically, and like a solid state or like a SD card, you're going to use something smaller to physically destroy that, or SIM cards, or cell phones, factory reset, right? As opposed to wiping or degaussing.
And 1J, plan durations to sanitize data from the time of receipt.
That seems a little troublesome. Go ahead, Maya.
We said the same thing at the same time, Mike. This is a hard one, but I'll let you take it, Mike. You are more gentle than I am.
Okay. So it says plan durations to sanitize data from the time of receipt. So how can we word this in a way not to get a non-conformity? Because this could be challenging. It depends on the operation. If it's a real busy time, some of the things are to get material out, and if you're doing data wiping, that is a process that takes a long time. That might be put off for a while. So in real busy times, you could run the risk of, assigning the person who usually does data wiping to something else, to getting resale material or other material out. So the plan duration, you could have a time range. The material comes in and it's sent to this data limited access area, and within the time that it gets there, it's done within this amount of time. It says plan duration, so why don't you just make it a really long time in order to be safe? It doesn't say you have to do it within 30 days. It just says plan durations from time of receipt. So the easiest way to go about this is say, we'll do it within a year, so that we don't run the risk of, if it's being determined to be a universal waste electronic device or whatever the regulatory thing is in your state, you're not running the risk of that. It depends on how the auditor might not be too happy with that, though.
Well, auditors are not there to tell organizations how they should do their process. We need to take a look at and see if the process is in place. So Absolutely. It can be, that we plan to perform data sanitization within X amount of time, unless otherwise requested or defined in our contracts.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
Right? And then, however, I just want to point this out. This is something general for all of the R2 recyclers that are, let's say, also doing demanufacturing and processing and testing and resale and so on and so forth, right? However, now I'm putting on my, kind of more of a business consultant than ISO consultant. If your primary business is data sanitization, and that is something that you do day in and day out, then me as a consultant would strongly recommend that you have a key process indicator or an objective around how fast, how soon you are processing orders, right? Because your business depends on data sanitization and the product coming in or being wiped and going out, right? So at the end of the day, you really should consider a key performance indicator related to that. Now, this is specific to only those recyclers who are just focusing on data sanitization.
That's a good point, yeah. And I think also implicit in this section is to have an aging procedure, a labeling procedure for incoming data-bearing devices, right? So that we know where our metrics are.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this depends on each operation is kind of different, so all of that would be specifically tailored to how a company operates. Kind of like what Maya was saying in terms of, putting on the business management hat, figuring out what works best for each respective operation.
1K, downstream vendors or contractors that perform data sanitization in accordance with this plan. If data sanitization is not performed internally, and where applicable, those downstream vendors whose services will be provided in another country. This is for recyclers who outsource their data sanitization, correct?
Yes. So you need to define that in your documentation. So a lot of operations have the ability to do internal data wiping, maybe degaussing, but they don't have a shredder. So if something fails, data wipe, or they don't have a degausser, they want to send it for shredding. So they might outsource that portion of it. So they have to define that that's outsourced. Typically in the US, I haven't seen a lot of those things, a lot of those processes of having somebody as a downstream vendor for data being done in another country. I suppose that's more probably prevalent, like in the EU and stuff like that, potentially. But yeah, it could apply. You have to define it.
Mm-hmm. And then 1L, records to be maintained to demonstrate the effectiveness of the sanitization and verification activities.
Okay, so this is, before there was element to provision 8 that said both quality controls and then like independent validation. And so this is the record keeping portion, how you're documenting the records that you're going to keep to demonstrate the effectiveness of the sanitization and verification activities. So you need to define here how what you're doing, what your method of quality control is, and what your method of verifying that your data sanitization process works. So I think this is something that a lot of people already have in their plan. It's just being worded in a different way.
And then 1M, process for authorizing and monitoring workers, visitors, and others permitted to have access to equipment and components containing data.
This is something that is like a sign-in sheet that's similar to what's required under the NAID standard, how you have to have a log for people that are coming into the area that is dedicated to data security, or even just the building itself. So you have to define the process there. So this is a new requirement that wasn't required under R2 2013.
And with that, we are going to go to section A2, still talking about documentation. An R2 facility shall document and maintain a written data security policy that A, prohibits unauthorized individuals from accessing or handling equipment containing data.
So this one, like you said, is part of the documentation. So people have a policy, environmental health and safety policy, and they have a policy for managing the used electronics in accordance with the R2 hierarchy. So this is adding another policy here. That wasn't required previously under R2 2013. So now you have to specifically have a data security policy that calls these things out. And it's very very much like the ISO standards, where it says you have to have a commitment to this, commitment to that, and a commitment to continual improvement. So I think this is just something that's going to be added policy to people's other EH&S and used electronic R2 hierarchy policies.
Okay, and then 2B, assign a competent data protection representative with the overall responsibility and authority for the R2 facility's data security and legal compliance, including oversight of all related duties otherwise assigned.
So this could be anyone that's appropriate for the facility, right? You don't have to have a specific data protection representative. And in the early drafts of the R2v3, I think it said data security manager, and there was comments that came in that changed this to say data protection representative rather than data protection manager, just so that it is somebody that can have other roles and responsibilities, the compliance person, the operations manager, the COO, whoever's appropriate for, you know, even the warehouse manager, if they're the ones that are the appropriate person for your organization.
2C mandates reporting of known and suspected breaches of security and data to the data protection representative.
So this is another new requirement, you know, specifically calling out how to conduct the data sanitization process, right? Or to how to control the data security process, I should say. This is more on the data security side of things. So you have probably you're going to need a log of suspected breaches and actual breaches, and you know, stuff like that wasn't required before. So now, aside from making sure that this is a part of your documentation and part of your policy, it's also adding another layer of stuff that you'll need to show as objective evidence for the auditor. They might ask, okay, so do you have a log of the known and suspected breaches that occurred in the last year? Can you show me that? So this is going to add another element to the system.
2D requires completed training and confidentiality agreements prior to individual authorization to handle equipment containing data.
So training was always required, but confidentiality agreements wasn't required. So that's something that's new. It's similar to elements of NAID, of the NAID certification.
And I think the wording was very specific because they want to make sure that they say, we need to see this training record. We need to see this training record. Because a lot of, you know, individuals are going to be like, oh, well, I know I have a resume that shows that they have experience in this, right? We have to show continual training in every process. I mean, whether you are R2 or any ISO, right? And especially here with data, because also with data security requirements change every year here and there. So these records have to be documented and maintained. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that the specific requirement 2 here requires completed training, which means that since the data security is at hand, on-the-job training is not sufficient. They need to be able to show that they have completed the training prior to going into the area so that they know what they need to do to properly handle and manage the data security and data sanitization.
Great point. Exactly. And one of the ways to implement something like this is if you have the on-the-job training, and before you release them to work on their own in data sanitization process, is you have them complete a quiz. And if they completed the quiz successfully, then you can say they completed the training. Therefore, they can proceed to work independently.
Mm-hmm. And 2E identifies penalties for non-compliance with the policy, including personal liability.
So this is interesting. You know, I mean, it puts some teeth in having the policy in place. You know, if there's what's the non-compliance for, you know, data breach that's done because of a person, and what's the personal liability, you know, of that respective person. So it holds people accountable here.
Yeah, not just, so his emphasis is that not only the organization will be accountable, but the individual will also be legally accountable for any type of breaches, and that type of information will have to be communicated probably as part of the training program, and would be probably the best way to communicate that.
Yeah.
And this is in a benefit to the recycler.
Mhm.
It kind of strengthens us to why they're adding certain processes and procedures and certain controls within the organization. So, and it is kind of, but at the same time, you know, it's forcing the recyclers to vet individuals who are touching the data sensitive equipment. So,
And Section 3 requires that all workers shall be trained regularly and verified to be competent on these policies and procedures for data security, consistent with their level of authorization.
boom.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say to this, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead, boom it. So yeah, I mean, before training was necessary to be done regularly, and also verify their competence, right? The only added element here is consistent with their level of authorization. So that means you need to define various levels, you know, of authorization, which is done already as part of this very comprehensive data sanitization plan.
Mm-hmm. And with that,
Can I need to add something here, right? It's really, really, really forcing the recycler to develop a very thorough job descriptions, training plans, and to really think through what are the training requirements and the documents, the records that are kept, and really forcing the recyclers to work a little bit more with those who are working in the data sanitization process to make sure they know what questions they're asking and what they're responsible for and what they're liable for. So I think as a business owner, I think this would be really beneficial to you, the recycler. However, from the implementation point of view, it is, you know, more time consuming, and it is definitely adding administrative costs to you. So from a liabilities perspective, it is helping to reduce your liabilities because now you're spreading the responsibilities and accountability to all of these personnel. However, the accounting cost of keeping up with the training plans and the training and the record keeping, it does become costly.
yeah. And with that said, we're going to move into the second section of data sanitization. So up until now, we were talking about documentation requirements. Now we're going to get into the second general principle, which is to employ security measures appropriate for the electronic equipment it handles and the suppliers it serves.
Okay, so this one, yeah, this is probably going to be very specific to each operation.
Section B1, Section B is the section talking about security, and B1, an R2 facility shall implement and maintain a security program that controls access to all or parts of the facility in a manner and to a degree appropriate given the type of electronic equipment handled, sensitivity of data on storage devices, and the needs of the suppliers served. This security program should consider risk of theft and unauthorized access to the facility and equipment.
I don't think that there's anything new here. I think this has already been there in place. I think it's just a little bit more specific wording.
Yes. And then B2, an R2 facility shall develop and implement levels of security authorizations to control access for employees, visitors, and contract workers based on the type of equipment received, the sensitivity of the data handled, and the legal, supplier, and other requirements applicable to the facility. Authorizations shall be granted by the data protection representative and based on documented evaluations allowed by law.
So this one is definitely a new requirement, and this is definitely going to be more work. And again, this is just very similar to requirements that are embedded in the NAID standard are now incorporated into this core requirement 7 here.
And if you're doing data security, the NAID standard would have been part of your compliance program anyway, if you're already certified to the R2 standard, correct?
Not necessarily. I mean, people can choose. It's another voluntary standard, so people can choose to be certified to it or not, you know, but probably certain elements are applicable to operations that are handling high level, you know, data that's sensitive. They're probably required by their suppliers to be NAID certified, as well as other, you know, various other security control measures.
Okay. B3, secured areas shall be clearly identified and labeled with signage to warn against unauthorized access.
Again, I think this is something that you just automatically do. If you have a data sanitization process, or if you have secured area, right? High value goods and things like that. This, I think, is just specifically calling it out in the procedure, in the process here, because maybe not everybody was doing it, but everybody I know more or less has been doing this already.
B4, appropriate security controls shall be implemented and monitored to limit access to equipment based on established security authorizations and the worker's need for access.
So that, yeah, it's kind of just access control. Respective workers shall be in the area where they're allowed access.
Okay.
I mean, how do you monitor that? That could be through access control, having certain people have a code, security guard, a locked area, or other types of ways to make sure that, you know, access is controlled to certain people in the operation.
You can also go further to take a look at, for example, if you have access keys, then you can actually look at the logs at the end of the day, at the end of the week, to make sure that only those who are authorized were able, you know, came in and things like that. But that's like really taking it further. And cameras too, right? We have cameras,
yeah,
that can be monitored. And the only thing is with that, you can have all the cameras in the world. If you're not monitoring it, then what's the point? And there are several facilities I did go in, and they have all of these cameras, but nobody is sitting in front of the cameras monitoring them. So what's the point? So really need to think about what are the security controls, why, and how often they're monitored.
And this is an extra added cost to the organization too, you know, to figure out a way to monitor this. That might be more than what they're doing now, probably is. So that's more resources, administrative resources going to this process, which could be a good thing for them on the marketing side to show that they have a real tight process in place. But it's gonna still cost.
Yes, exactly.
And B5, for individuals granted security authorization, the R2 facility shall maintain in writing individual acknowledgements of the responsibility to prevent disclosure of data and to report any theft of equipment or data breaches, and to disclose any incidents that may change their security authorization.
So this is probably like a form. Yeah, go ahead, Maya.
Sorry, so this is just more of that liability, transferring the liability, right? So I think implementing a security policy such as this, including to letting know, I think it was one, hold on, let me scroll up. Where do we talk about liability?
It's in 2E.
2E, okay, so yeah, so 2E and B5, right? Those requirements there can be put together, and you can meet these two requirements with one document and or policy, and that the individuals are signing and acknowledging, right? Including putting a language in your training related to this, and in your corrective action, preventive action, or incident reporting system.
Mm-hmm.
And also the confidentiality agreement referred to in 2D, right? That could be a part of this, that they're have a individual acknowledgement of their responsibility and to report any theft equipment. So now the R2v3 standard is asking people to be snitches. Right.
Oh, Mike, you didn't say that. No, I would reword that to say responsible, right?
Yeah, I'm joking.
I know. But it is very, very sensitive. I mean, I know that I wouldn't want a recycler who gets my phone to recycle, right? If they have some access to certain information on there, I would want them to immediately reset my phone before it goes through the facility, right? So I would expect that process to be the first process, and not, going through the cell phone to see whether or not you can repair it and somebody sees some of my personal information, right? So I think this is where also really, I'm okay with this requirement, Mike.
And B6, an incident response procedure shall be created and implemented to investigate potential data or security breaches and to notify affected suppliers, legal authorities, and other interested parties as required by law of any potential or actual breaches.
So hopefully I think this could be done. You have your non-conformity, corrective action, incident investigation, and now actual or potential data security breaches report can be consolidated into one, and you could have different things that need to be filled out for those respective areas, depending on what type of category it falls into.
I do want to, this is one of the comments that I made during the comment section here. During the time that R2v3 was in comments, I said that the potential data breaches, unless they are confirmed, I cannot, I cannot imagine organizations publicizing potential data breaches.
Yeah, and where do you draw the line between a potential breach that with the high risk of coming into fruition and a potential data breach that it's like you have to do a risk assessment only on potential data breaches?
Well, then, I mean, I guess it could be something like somebody attempted to steal something from the operation and got caught by the camera, by the guard, by their, the manager or another employee,
But imagine, Mike, the business implication if you are, if you are notifying anybody of this.
But
I know.
It is, the reporting requirement is as required by law.
Which I think they added after a few iterations of this, again, now at this point, I don't remember. I have a mama brain, right? It's just investigate potential data breaches. Yes.
So let's look at the way that oh, go ahead.
So like, for example, as consultants, we're going to focus on the fact that to investigate the potential data breaches, you just investigate, but the reporting only if there is a data breach and it's required by law, right?
So that's the thing, and that particular clause of this sentence there, it says, and to notify affected suppliers, comma, legal authorities, no comma, and then and other interested parties as required by law. Does the required by law only apply to the other interested parties, or does it also apply to affected suppliers and legal authorities there? I don't know, because they didn't put the Oxford comma.
Think about it. Other interested parties can be me, myself. You're recycling my cell phone and somebody took it and they have my personal information. So are you just going to notify me, or you're going to notify the customer who collected my cell phone to give it to you?
Yeah.
So it's a very, this is very, you can define it any way you want. This is why I think it's very important to have those clear terms and conditions before you commit to a service.
Yeah, and I think this also teaches us the importance of the Oxford comma.
Yes.
Any closing thoughts on section B, security?
It's a lot of new stuff. A lot of new, but old, right? A lot of things that a lot of organizations that handle data have had in place before, but it's new because it all needs to be documented. And then expanding the liabilities and potential data breaches. So this is a lot. It's a lot, and we're not even done yet. That's only section B.
So moving on to section C, which is specific to the process requirements. So C1, for the receiving of any equipment or components that may contain data, the R2 facility shall provide to the supplier confirmation of A, receipt of equipment or components containing data. Should we pause there?
No, I think maybe all of these can be read. They're really short.
B, the method of data sanitation to be used. And C, whether data sanitization will be performed internally or by a downstream vendor.
So all of this stuff is also kind of part of the rec in terms of how you're categorizing it. But for receiving equipment, you provide to the supplier confirmation that you received it and the method of data sanitization that will be used, and whether data sanitization will be performed internally or by a downstream vendor. Again, I think this is something, like Maya is saying, is perfect to put into the terms and conditions, because can you imagine the administrative burden of trying to do this on a case-by-case basis? It's like an added level of administrative costs that probably would be surmountable. That's all I got there.
I'm going to read after in section B, it says the method, and then there's like a little link to the bottom of the page.
Subscript?
Subscript, which says all data must be sanitized unless the supplier has requested it not be, and contractually stipulated this requirement against the recommendation of the R2 facility. However, the R2 facility may not expressly exclude their responsibility for data sanitization of accepted equipment or components through waivers, limitations of liability, or other types of contracts with the supplier.
This is exactly what I was talking about earlier, right? And this is something that was not written in version 2013, but it was implied, and this is something that the auditors audited to, and this is something that we have consulted our clients on, right? So this is exactly what you need to do. This is why, again, we're going back to original terms and conditions I was talking about. You really need to specify all of these requirements there. And again, I want to point this out that you cannot use limitations of liability language in your terms and conditions.
With regard to data sanitization, correct?
Right, yes, correct. Mm-hmm.
Anything to add to that, Mike?
No.
Okay, so C2, equipment and components containing data shall be sanitized in a timely and effective manner in accordance with one of the following methods as disclosed to the supplier. A.
So there goes my 1 year. Holding it for 1 year.
A, sanitize the data on the data storage devices in accordance with Appendix B, Data Sanitization, which
Okay.
The appendixes are specific to the facility's procedures, so they would apply to a facility that performs data sanitization, and we're going to dive deep into Appendix B, like we were doing on these core requirements in a later video. So be sure to check that out if this applies to you. Moving on, is there anything you guys want to add?
No, I mean, that's straightforward. That's just saying that you have to do it in accordance with Appendix B, data sanitization. So I think most organizations, most R2 facilities are probably going to be subject to this process requirement. So they'll have to follow and be certified to Appendix B as well.
Yes, and I just want to highlight to what Mike commented, there goes my 1 year. I do want to reread one portion of this too. It says equipment and components containing data shall be sanitized in a timely and effective manner. So I will not talk about effective manner. That's the verification of your processes, validation, verification process, but the timely manner, right? So this is what I was talking about, your key performance indicators. This is what I was talking about, your objective if you are in business of data eradication day in and day out, if that's your main business, right? So again, timely manner is going to depend on how many different processes you have in the appendix, right? And what is your volume and how many personnel you have. So what is your capacity? So maybe what you should, again, depends on your operation, but one of the things you can take a look at, what is your capacity? Maybe you need to put together a capacity plan for processing data, whether it's on yearly basis or quarterly basis, and that set the time frame for you as what is timely manner.
Mm-hmm. And to be physically destroy the data storage media in accordance with an applicable method defined in Appendix A of the NIST Guidelines for Media Sanitization, Special Publication 800-88 Revision 1, and verify destruction in accordance with a defined process to demonstrate 100% effectiveness of the destruction process.
100% effectiveness of the destruction process. So the Appendix A of the NIST guidelines here is referring to the different methods that are used according to, like, you know, a hard drive disk, solid state drive, cellular phone, SD card, you know, tapes and other types of, you know, media or data-bearing devices, and what needs to be done to show that they're physically destroyed. Demonstrating 100% effectiveness of the destruction process can still be a observation to look to see how that it's, you know, shred to a certain size, or, you know, to that it's being completely rendered useless after the physical destruction process. But this one is what the recycler, or the R2 facility, excuse me, can choose. They can choose to either do Appendix B data sanitization or this process. So if they choose to do the process B, but they're actually doing data sanitization, it doesn't mean that they don't need to also be certified to Appendix B, from my understanding, because if you're doing that process at your facility, you also need to be certified to this, but maybe they don't need to follow the requirements for that certain type of equipment if they're doing the 100% effectiveness demonstration for physical destruction. Which sounds really complicated. I'm sorry if that's...
No, that makes sense, because there is an or at the end of the clause. So you either sanitize in accordance with Appendix B, or you physically destroy the data in accordance with the NIST guidelines.
Yeah.
Depending on what your process is.
But it's specifically saying physically destroy.
Yeah, so I think this would be, you can either choose either or, and your method can be determined depending on what kind of a device it is, right? Because if I am, and also depending on what my contract says, right? So if I can just take hard drives and do a sanitization and they fail, well, then I'm going to go to physical destruction route, right? So, or C, Asal is about to read it, right? So I think it depends. You don't necessarily have to take on all of them. You don't have to have a process for all of them. You don't necessarily have to have a shredder to fully destroy, but you do have to have a method that if your data sanitization process fails, what are you going to do as well? So,
and C states to that the third option is ship/transfer data storage devices under written contract to a downstream vendor that has been verified in accordance with Appendix A downstream recycling chain, with the capabilities to sanitize data from the type of equipment shipped in accordance with the planned method disclosed to the supplier.
So those are the three options that you have, right? You could either do it yourself in accordance with Appendix B. You can do physical destruction, which is a part of Appendix B already. But this section B here is requiring 100% effectiveness demonstration, or you can ship it to a downstream vendor to manage the data. So those are your three options that you have. So you have to rigorously manage this material or the data sanitization process.
And I actually now we can go back to the timely destruction that we talked about, right? So there are facilities that do focus on 2A, which is sanitizing the data. And they wait to accumulate sufficient amount of failed drives, let's say, for example, before they operate their shredder. However, how long are they going to wait to destroy the hard drives if it takes them over a year to accumulate a couple of Gaylord boxes, right? So this is, again, I think where the timely manner comes into place. The same thing if I am accumulating Gaylords full of hard drives, how long am I going to wait before it makes sense for me to pay for the shipping cost for these drives to be sent to my approved downstream? So I think this is where the timely manner can really play a big role. So you really need to think about, you as a recycler need to think about what makes most sense for you.
And I think it's important to point out that if you are outsourcing or sending data to a downstream vendor, they would have to comply with what you communicated to your customer on how you plan on destroying the data. Section 3, internal data security and sanitization audits shall be performed at a minimum annually by a competent and independent auditor to validate the data sanitization process are effective and conforming to the R2 standard, legal requirements, and the Data Sanitization Plan.
I think this is a great addition because it was required under R2 2013, but it was written in such a way that many people didn't perform this. So this used to be the independent validation. So what a lot of people did is they would just send some hard drives out to somebody who would forensically try to recover data and say that's, you know, sufficient for independent validation. But the standard said before under R2 2013, independent validation of the data destruction processes. So it's not only a few hard drives, but it's like the effectiveness of the training, the security controls that you have in place, your whole process of data destruction, data sanitization needs to be audited by somebody. And this independent person can still be somebody in the organization, but they have to be competent and independent of the valid data sanitization process in order to make sure that you have an effective process in place for all of these things. So this is, I think, a good addition to define what was required under the previous standard in a very clear manner.
Mike, that's great. You're exactly right. And the only thing that I want to add is actually a lot. It's not just a snippet. I think we're going to go definitely over an hour on this video, it looks like. But thank you everybody for staying with us. What I wanted to point out that the reason that this has made it to R2 is because originally, this is a special process, right? So data sanitization or physical destructions of hard drives is a special process. It's a special process as it was defined back in ISO 9001, right? So in ISO 9001, in a basic quality management system, we are asked to verify and validate special processes to kind of bring it back home to us, right? We use cell phones and computers day in and day out, right? One of the main components here, we have circuit boards, and that require soldering. Soldering is a special process. If the soldering is not effective and efficient, then my computer is not going to work. So those manufacturers that are manufacturing circuit boards are required to verify and validate their soldering process on periodic basis. But so what that means, it is really to take a look at what is my soldering procedure plan, what is the training, what is the equipment that I'm using, right? So what we have done when we're working with R2 recyclers, we have taken that approach and applied it to the data verification validation process where our clients internally can validate this process themselves, like Mike is talking about. So I think that as much as the circuit boards are key, for the quality of functioning of our cell phones and our computers, right? A data destruction, data eradication process is key to make sure that the quality of service that the recyclers are providing to their customers is effective, is 100, it's excellent customer service, because that data eradication is going to be successful. And that is why this process of validating and verifying, validation and verification of your data eradication destruction process is really, really important. So I'm really glad that they defined it here to the T, like Mike said.
And the section D talks about notification requirements. An R2 facility shall maintain a process to provide information to suppliers where requested of the following: A, changes in downstream vendors to process suppliers' equipment and components containing data, and B, breaches in security.
Aha, this is where they removed potential breaches of security, because I said this is not going to happen. I literally, my comment in the original drafts was, this is not going to happen. This is not going to happen, because, they also said that they wanted recyclers to notify of potential breaches, and that's just not realistic. Now, the actual breaches of security, that makes sense.
Anything to add, Mike?
No, I think this is fairly straightforward.
Any closing thoughts on data security in general? It's a lot.
It's a huge, huge, huge change. I get it. Data security is a very important part of used electronics. You're managing. It's it's the largest growing stream of waste, right? Is used electronics, and how most electronics that we have some type of data on them. Data.
Yeah,
so
personal identification data, account numbers, medical records, fingerprints, face recognition.
Yeah, we use it for payment methods now. All financial information and stuff like that. Everything's on there. And traveling and auditing a lot, you see each person kind of has like a few electronic devices on them at all times. Somebody has a cell phone, a laptop, and sometimes even like a tablet, or for going to the airport. Frequently, you see, not nowadays, obviously, but previous to COVID-19, when I was in the air all the time, you see those things, like how many, so that's one person, multiple devices, and that's all containing information on them. And these are all so each person generates these things that are eventually gonna either become reusable equipment or material recovery, and they need to go through the data sanitization process. So this is really something that's important, because it is 100% happening. Every person has this data, and they want to make sure that it's managed properly. Like Maya said, I don't want to give my phone to this recycler unless I know that they're doing something right with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you have any questions with regards to R2v3 data security or any other core requirement of the R2 standard, email us at info@glenviewgroup.com, and also join us for our next read-along, which will cover core requirement 8, focus materials. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Next time we're going to try to be shorter.
Goodbye.